Okay, well, thank you guys all for coming out and joining us on this very warm Friday night. I'm not sure where everyone is at, but at least here it's very warm in DC. And chocolate would melt, but fortunately we're inside eating chocolate, so our chocolate will be okay. Tonight we're going to be having our Sweet Saints virtual event with author Melanie Rigney and One More Page proclaimed wine and chocolate expert Meg Gilroy. Most of us love wine, we love chocolate, but saints, sometimes we love them, sometimes we're challenged by them, and oftentimes we need them. Melanie has found much comfort in writing about saints, and tonight she's going to be sharing from her new book, Radical Saints, 21 Women for the 21st Century. These saints, all of whom lived in the 20th century and were canonized in the 21st, stood out from the crowd. They went against the tide, set aside their comfort and self-interest, and achieved something great for God. Melanie's the author of several books, and we've been fortunate to be able to host her for some of her book events, including Sisterhood of Saints, Daily Guidance and Inspiration. She also writes for the Catholic Digest, Living Faith, CatholicMom.com, Women in New Evangelization, and other sites and publications. She is quite prolific and, in fact, has another book coming out this year, scheduled for release in October, Brotherhood of Saints, Daily Guidance and Inspiration, a companion to her Sisterhood of Saints book. Meg is one of our favorite longtime customers. She is an expert on all things wine and chocolate. In fact, Meg has often been pressed into service, if I'm doing the wine tastings, to be our wine expert. I am sure she had a very exciting and important career before moving into this role, but that is what we love her for here at One More Page. So without further ado, let me pass this along to Melanie Rigney and Meg Gilroy.
Well, thank you so much, Eileen, and thanks to you and your staff. I think you occupy a very special place in the hearts of everyone in the Arlington area, and all that you've done to keep us going during the pandemic with door-to-door delivery, special orders, and chocolate, of course. So, and to Meg, also, I want to thank the women, many of whom I believe are here tonight, who share their personal stories. Everyday women today living what you might think are ordinary lives, but in a very extraordinary, inspirational day in the book. So I think it's kind of funny that, over the course of this, I've kind of gotten to know a thing or two about saints. And my dear friend Meg Gilroy, in part due to the fact she loves wine and chocolate, but also because she's lived all over the world, Meg knows more than a thing or two about chocolate and wine. So I'm very excited to have her on this journey tonight. And the great thing is, everything that you're going to see us drinking tonight, there's a special handout that'll provide all the information on what we're drinking in case you want to get any. Same thing with the chocolates. And if you are fortunate enough to live in the Arlington Falls Church area, you can even have them delivered to you by One More Page or do curbside pickup. So we're really excited to share kind of a fun time in the midst of a challenging time. Just by way of background, the Catholic Church's thousands of canonized saints include martyrs, parents, teachers, nurses, doctors, religious people, social workers. Now, out of those thousands and thousands, in fact, there's so many we don't even exactly know how many there are, 37 are women who walked the earth in the 20th century and were canonized in the 21st. And as Eileen said, this book specifically looks at 21 of them. And they were all photographed. Many of them rode in cars, many of them rode on airplanes. Some watched television. They knew many of the same opportunities and many of the same challenges and temptations of the pre-social media world that we have in the modern world. I think there's a special connection with us for them. Out of the four that I'm going to speak about tonight that I hope will interest you and resonate with you, both of my grandmothers were alive during the time that all four of these women were alive. Two of them were alive when my mom was alive during two of their times. I was alive during one, and one of them died 13 months before I was born. So I think you will find that at least one woman tonight, or, certainly within the book, lived during yours or your parents' time. And I think there's a special intimacy to that. And that's nothing against the women who lived centuries ago, but I think there's a special connection for all of us. Now, I had somebody ask me the other day what made one of the other women in the book a saint, because she wasn't a martyr, and she didn't levitate, and she didn't write any great works. She's not a doctor, teacher of the book. My answer was that it was her holy and virtuous life, heroic virtues, if you will. So I'm going to kind of talk a little bit about four women, a couple of whom you've probably heard of, a couple of whom you probably haven't. And their heroic virtues might not sound like a big deal to you, but they were. They were when they were living. They are today. You're probably living some of these virtues and inspiring other people, and you don't even know it. So I hope you'll take that away from this. That's my prayer for you. So let's start with Madre Nati. Now, she was Mexico's first woman saint. And we're going to flip to her in just a second and see her dates. But just so you know, she she was born in Mexico in 1868, and she died in July of 1959.
Hey, Mel.
Yeah.
I'm trying, but it's not showing up. It's not changing. Okay. It's not changing on the screen here.
That's okay. Hang on just one second. Let me see if...
This is my first time hosting, guys, so I'm sorry about that.
Be gentle. It's all good.
Wisdom, patience is a virtue, right?
Oh, man. It's one that we'll learn about with some of these saints even. You know what? Yeah, I can share my screen, right?
And I'm going to remove my screen.
Okay. So let's share that.
Let's see. Is it this one?
There. Can you see it now?
Yeah. Can you move it? Just make it go to the next one.
There you go. Here she is. Now, she's an interesting woman. She was the first female saint of Mexico, and she really had it all going for her. She had a good education. She was a good writer. She actually had some travel type pieces published. She was also very spiritual and into doing good works. But while service came to her young, especially with young people, it wasn't until she was nearly 40 that she made a retreat, and as a result, joined a new community of women religious at a Guadalajara hospital. And it turned out that hospital work actually suited her very well. She started out as a nurse. She became a pharmacist. Then she was an accountant. For 30 years, she served as this hospital in Guadalajara supervisor and a superior general of her community. Probably the most challenging years were during the Cristeros Rebellion in the late 1920s. Now, if you're not familiar with Mexico during that time, there was an anti-Catholic government, and in the space of 3 years, 90,000 people died. When the government soldiers came to her hospital, I guess I like to imagine how she felt, and I think she must have been both fearful for her patients and for her, the other women in her community. And I would think she was probably also very angry as a medical professional about soldiers coming into her space. All she was trying to do was help people who were sick. And yet she managed to find the faith and the strength to surrender those emotions in favor of loving her neighbor. And her neighbor was, of course, the sick people and the women in her community, but it was also the soldiers. And she showed them love and hospitality and mercy. As a result, the hospital stayed open And during the entire time that she was the administrator, no one was ever turned away. It didn't matter what your faith was. It didn't matter what your politics were. It didn't really matter what your religion was. And I think in doing that, she showed confidence in God and in hospitality to his path for her. The hospital's still going on today. And here you might find, we'll put this on the website at one more page. Eileen will let us know where that is. And I'll put it on my website. Happy to email it to you too. But it's really very cool to look at this video and actually see pictures of her, and then that her sisters continue to do this good work today. To me, her example reminds us to be hospitable and compassionate to those we fear and to those who anger us. And that might be because that person is wearing or not wearing a mask. They might agree or disagree with us on politics. There are all kinds of things we can find to divide us. And I think Madre Nati reminds us that we need to be open to loving and to finding those commonalities, because there is some good in every single solitary person. I am going to now stop sharing my screen, but again, you'll be able to get these special pairings online. But so Meg, can you tell us about what made you choose Madre Nati? Or what your pairings are for her?
Sure, but first, Mel, I want to thank you very, very much for inviting me to be part of this presentation. It's really quite humbling. And one more page, thank you so much for all the support and all of the wonderful items you have for purchase in your store. And Mel, when you said that Madre Nati was going to be the first of the saints chosen, I was very excited because she's from Mexico. And we in the Western world, or the old world, did not know about chocolate until the Spanish conquistadors went to the New World. And one of the great discoveries they had was chocolate. And the Latin name for chocolate is Theobroma, or food of the gods.
Woo!
So, yes, we are in a holy place. And so I thought about this, and discussing it with Eileen and her staff, we decided that all of the chocolates had to come from the stock that they had, as did all of the wine. Now, I know there are some people who, for one reason or another, do not eat chocolate or do not drink. That's okay. You can have a cookie instead and maybe have some fizzy water or tea to go along. Excellent. Well done. So for the first chocolate, I'm going to hold it up to the camera. It's Kingsbury, whoops, I just read Kingsbury milk chocolate with roasted almonds and Vietnamese cinnamon. And you might think, Vietnam, why? Because Mexican chocolate, one of the beauties of it is it's less sweet than the chocolate we eat in the United States. And they also put a little bit of cinnamon and sometimes a little bit of chili, ancho chili in it. So it gives it a very unique and different flavor. And to pair it, I thought we should have a very nice light red wine, which, oops, I'll get it down here in a minute. It is Bastide, oops, sorry about that, Miraflores, which is a French wine, and it comes from southern France, from an area called Côte Catalan, which is just on the other side of the Pyrenees from Catalonia. And many people from Catalonia emigrated to Mexico. So I don't know if Madre Nati shares a Catalan ancestor, but to her very good health and to her memory.
Amen. And I will say, it's really smooth. And when I took my first sip, I thought, not to get all goofy, but I always get goofy about the Saints. I thought, this is kind of like her personality. No, but seriously, that smooth, that, okay. God's got this. We're going to handle it. There's not a lot of bite to it. It's not too sweet. It's kind of a real wine in terms of the taste being blended and it being accessible and not off-putting. And I think it was a great choice, Meg.
Well, thank you. I wish I could claim credit for this, but I really think the Holy Spirit guided me.
Okay, well, thank you, Meg. We are next going to go to, we're going to go from Mexico to Hawaii with a little bit of a stop in, we're going to take a little bit of a stop in upstate New York. Oh, excuse me, got the wrong woman. We'll talk about that one later. Hey, we're all having fun. So
it's the wine.
Yeah. Katherine Drexel. You probably have heard of Katherine Drexel. You probably have heard of the Drexel family. Anything you have ever heard about with Drexel in terms of Drexel University in Philadelphia or the old Drexel Burnham Lambert? That was Katherine Drexel's family. Her grandfather was a big-time financier, and the family did very, very well for itself. Katherine grew up, but the Drexels were also very, very philanthropic. They were kind. They were full of outreach. Katherine's father and her stepmother used to open up their relatively grand Philadelphia home every week to invite in the poor. And in fact, the three Drexel girls used to teach Sunday school to anyone who came in. You didn't stand at the door and get a packet and leave. That Katherine's father and her mother would bring people into the house to sit down and dine with them. They would provide them with clothing. They treated people with real respect and dignity. So, obviously, a great example. Katherine's stepmother died, and then when her father died, she and her sisters came into a great deal of money. They received the interest off her father's estate, and what ended up happening with her father's estate is a whole different fascinating story. Anyway, so Katherine decided that her focus for philanthropy would be Native Americans. She made many trips to the West and to the Midwest. She actually visited at one point my home state of South Dakota, and so this was her mission. She knew there was a need, but she needed missionaries because it's not all about money. So, being a Drexel, she got an audience with the Pope. Not a big deal because she was a Drexel, right? But Leo the 13th, who had a very interesting way of asking our women saints questions back, I'll let Meg tell you about one of those, said, Leo, so she went to Leo the 13th, and she was very, very appropriate and very respectful, but she said she really needed to have some missionaries out on the West Coast in the Pacific Northwest in the United States, and that she would fund them. And Leo the 13th asked her why she didn't become a missionary herself. This was not the answer Katherine Drexel expected at all. She ended up leaving this audience with the Pope in tears. At one point in her life, she had considered religious life, but she and her parents and her spiritual director all advised against it because while Katherine certainly had a philanthropic background, heritage, and indeed in her own heart and soul, she didn't like the idea of giving up the privileges. She didn't like the idea of not having her own room. She didn't like the idea of not having servants. She didn't like the idea of having any deprivation at all. In fact, she was quite vocal about that, wrote it in her diary. But the Pope's question stuck with her. And she kept thinking about it. And 2 years later, on her 30th birthday, she decided she would say yes. And Katherine Drexel spent nearly 40 years, the next nearly 40 years, establishing schools and missions for Native Americans and African Americans, including the founding of Xavier University in New Orleans, which was the only U.S. Catholic, historically Black college. But I think for me, that's what I find challenging, and what I really I try to learn from Katherine Drexel is her need to discern when it was suggested that more than her money was needed by God and by his people, something that would make her uncomfortable. And I think about what that yes looks like to us today. Maybe it's a teenager who gives up a baby for adoption. Maybe it's a couple who takes in a teenager for fostering and ends up with 4 of her relatives also living with them. I think that thinking about what might make us uncomfortable also makes us radical. And it's that yes that can be so difficult to give, but can also be so freeing at the same time. So here are a few resources regarding Katherine Drexel. And for those of us on the East Coast, it's really not very far at all to get up to Philadelphia and to go to the Basilica. While we might not be able to go right now, we can still take a virtual tour, which is pretty cool. So Meg Katherine Drexel was born in Philly, and she ended up back at the Mother House after all of her years of work all over the country, ended up back in Philly. So I don't know. You tell us what you got for Katherine.
Well, she is a true daughter of Pennsylvania. And in my mind, one of the first things that comes to me when I think of Pennsylvania is pretzels. I think the Pennsylvania pretzel is incomparable. It's very, very hard for another state to come up with a better pretzel. And so I have here Kingsbury milk chocolate, honey wheat pretzels, and sea salt. So I think that maybe Mother Drexel would have enjoyed a pretzel, I'm not sure, but coming from a very well-to-do family, and she actually made her debut, I presume when she was 18, as young girls in society did. So it was really no problem at all coming up with a sparkling wine. We have here, I'll get the hang of this eventually, Gruet Sauvage. Now, you might wonder why I picked Gruet, and it's because of the New Mexico connection. Most people do not realize that New Mexico is also wine growing country. And Mother Drexel, I believe in the late 1890s, opened a boarding school for Native Americans in Santa Fe. So I believe that at some point, perhaps before she took holy orders, or maybe after she did, because she liked a couple of privileges, she might have had a lovely glass of sparkling wine in the evenings.
That's a great taste too, Meg. Now, I would like to note, though, for that purpose, before Katherine became a woman religious, the privileges of being a Drexel was that you had your own car and your own train.
Wow.
So when they went out to the Pacific Northwest, it was on a private train. So perhaps we can imagine Katherine in a car going to New Mexico, private car. And, being served.
There we go. And I also want to point out that sauvage, while it literally translates from the French as savage, actually in this context means that it doesn't have any added sugars. And a lot of people in the States don't like champagne or sparkling wine because they say it gives them a headache. And that's because sometimes to mask either inferior grapes or a year where the vintage wasn't all that great, the winemaker will add a small amount of extra sugar and sometimes adds cognac to the sparkling wine. Now, if we do have some time, I would just like to pick up on something you mentioned about Leo the 13th and his great ability to sort of throw people for a loop. I'm certainly glad I was never in an audience with that. I guess it was about maybe like 2, 3, 5 years after Katherine Drexel got seriously redirected. Francis Xavier Cabrini, who was the first citizen saint of North America, the United States, went to see Leo the 13th because she wanted to found a missionary order to go to China and, you know, spread the Lord's word there. And Leo the 13th, obviously it was another spirit-inspired moment, said to her, not to the east, but to the west. Mother Cabrini was like, what? What is he talking about? And the next thing she knew, she and, you know, half a dozen fellow sisters or sister sisters wound up on a boat going to New York, where she wound up spending the rest of her life in the United States and also in the Western Hemisphere. She traveled around, and I like to think, although I have no idea what this happened or not, but at some point her path crossed with Mother Drexel, and they may have shared thoughts on mission work.
Yeah, if I recall, I believe that Katherine Drexel actually reached out to Mother Cabrini about, because Mother Cabrini had done so much good work in communities that didn't have the privileges of some people. And Katherine Drexel, once she was in, she was all in. And she wanted to be respectful and do her ministry heart to heart, not like with her up here and people down here. And she really admired Mother Cabrini for that. And yeah.
Oh, that's neat. Yeah.
And you have a special relationship with Mother Cabrini, I believe, Meg.
Yes, I do indeed. Mother Cabrini High School, Fort Washington Avenue, New York City, class of 1972. And if you're actually doing a pilgrimage up the East Coast from Washington, D.C., when, you know, the sort of COVID time is no more, you can do this really nice sort of holy woman trail, stopping first in Maryland to see the Shrine of Mother Seton, then stopping in Philadelphia for the Shrine of Mother Drexel, and ending in northern Manhattan to see the Shrine of Mother Cabrini. So
great.
I'm a Cabrini girl.
Yeah.
I will not sing the school song. I'll spare you that.
I do just want to encourage you too, while you know, while we have these great wine offerings and great chocolate offerings, I really consider what I write to be a gateway drug. That's one of the joys of these, in a good way, because you'll find, especially for these women who lived in the 20th century, their writings are readily available online. You know, there also are cases, there are a couple of really good biographies of Katherine Drexel. But so I hope that you'll find somebody that you want to delve into a little bit further. Their writings often are available, as I said, free, and they're also available many times translated in the case of people like Madre Nate. So I know we're being a little goofy tonight. I like to think the saints would be happy with that. But it is also an opportunity to get to know them a little better and to have some little bit of food and wine companionship with them. So I think, Meg, now we're going to go back to the one that I kind of messed up there. We're going to talk about a woman who started in, actually her story begins in Germany, and then we take her to New York State and on to Hawaii. So that is St. Marianne Cope. Marianne Cope, I think, is especially of interest to us today with the pandemic going on. Her family immigrated from Germany to upstate New York when she was 2 years old. And Marianne, who was called Barbara at that point, worked in a factory for a time. She got her call to religious life much earlier than the other two women we've talked about. Madre Nate did not become a woman religious until she was about 40, and Katherine Drexel made her decision on her 30th birthday. Marianne Cope was much younger. She began to pursue a religious life at about 24. And while she thought she wanted to be a teacher at first, it turned out that healthcare was really where she would excel. She spent about 20 years at an upstate New York hospital. She was the administrator there with her community. There were times that she ran into problems because, sort of like Madre Nate, she thought that it was important to welcome the stranger. And in her case in Syracuse, New York, that stranger included people that were considered undesirable, such as alcoholics. She was living the life. She was living the life she thought she was meant to live. Great administrator, great spiritual advisor and director for the women in her community. And then one day she got this letter. And the letter asked if she would go to Hawaii because there were people whose souls were in need of redemption there. And she thought it was kind of interesting. So she wrote back, and the letters kind of got more and more urgent, including, your basic plea of the time that this priest thought it was really important that it be a community of women religious Catholics because otherwise the Protestants were going to swoop in. Anyway, this correspondence had gone on for several months before the priest explained to her that the ministry would actually be to people who have Hansen's disease, which at that point was known as leprosy. He had asked 4 dozen other communities of women religious, all of whom had said no once they found that out. It's important for us to remember that at that point, if you contracted Hansen's, it was pretty much seen as a death sentence. Even the children of people who had Hansen's in Hawaii during this area could not live with other children. They were placed in orphanages. So when she finally found out what was going on, Marianne Cope and her sisters were not like the other 4 dozen communities. They said yes. So they went to Hawaii, and they didn't just minister to people. And in this picture, Marianne Cope is the 3rd woman from the left. And this was, again, a case of ministry by heart, not top-down ministry. She advocated untiringly for the people who were dealing with Hansen's, whether they suffered from the disease themselves or they were the children. She advocated for them as people, period, not people in need. She ended up at one point getting a hospital administrator who she found out had been cruel to the patients, kicked out because she threatened that she and her sisters would leave Hawaii if not. She said yes throughout her life to advocating for pariahs, for people who couldn't advocate for themselves. And she makes me think about the pariahs in the world today, the people who don't look like us, who might be of a different ethnicity or a different economic class, different age, or maybe they just think differently than we do politically. The importance of loving and ministering, not giving up on people ever, because when we give up on people, we diminish ourselves as well. So here I just wanted to offer a couple of resources before I turn things over to Meg. I think the audiovisual exhibits of the museum in Syracuse are particularly lovely, as are the those at the pictures at the Cathedral Basilica in Honolulu. There was a priest, Saint Damien of Molokai, who was there before Marianne Cope, and Father Damien did contract Hansen's, and she nursed him in his final days. There's also a lesson for us here in that Marianne Cope ministered to people with Hansen's for 35 years and never contracted the disease herself. And she is, at the credit, we're told, goes to the fact that she had very, very strict hygiene habits. So I hope the takeaway for tonight is wash your hands, wash your hands. So Meg is going to give us some ideas now as far as what we might want to eat and drink when we're learning more about Marianne Cope. So back to you, Meg.
Well, thank you, Mel. And I must say, what an extraordinary surname. Because one of the beauties, I think, of pretty much every single holy woman and man ever was their ability to cope. And it's something that we should really try to, do ourselves, is maybe do a better job of coping with these unusual times. And when I was listening to you and when I was reading the book about Marianne Cope, I thought, what's a good way of showing a chocolate tribute to her? And so we have Kingsbury's German chocolate, which is dark chocolate, my personal favorite, coconut, which is, quite common in Hawaii, caramel toffee, and candied pecans. So I'm sure that, Mother Marianne and her sisters, after a hard day of nursing, hand washing, and praying, would like to sit down and enjoy a little refreshment. So some dark chocolate, some coconut, maybe even Mother Marianne herself made some German chocolate cake, when it was her turn to serve in the kitchen. And I thought a really good, nice light wine to go with that would be a French Côte Est. It's a white blend with Grenache, Chardonnay, and Roussanne. I'm in a bit of a rut because it's also from the French Catalan region. But, it just seemed to be a really good wine to select because it's a little crisp. It's not too fruity. It doesn't have the butteriness that you usually get with Chardonnay. So I think it's sort of a perfect wine for the tropics. So to Mother Marianne and her sisters, and to Father Molokai too, Father Damien.
Sehr good.
Ooh.
I think it's so interesting that, which is why in the little handout and in these pictures, I tried to show these women. I could only find one photo of Madre Nate, but they were women of action.
Oh, yeah.
I think sometimes we think, all the saints ever did, all the women religious ever do is sit around and pray and be holy. And it's just like, there's a lot of holiness in action. And there's also a lot of holiness in rest at the end of the day of action.
Yeah, but these women had energy. And, I can only say it had to be God's grace because, left to human devices, we've only got so much gas in the tank, and it has to be God, sort of pouring in more and more energy. I'd just like to take a little detour and respond to a question that we have. Yes, you can order online. And at the end, Eileen will be coming back and give you details. I can say if you go to the One More Page website now, you can definitely order the book, which you should if you haven't done already. It's a great book. Hang on, I'll hold my copy up right now. And you can also order the chocolates online, but you can't order the wine online. You have to call them up.
Oh, but Meg, you missed this. That's going to change.
Happy day! My weekend
I threw myself in for the good news. You can't hear me laughing. over here. All right, back to the Meg and Mel show.
Well, wait, should we go to the website now and start ordering? I mean, I don't want to cut into your sales.
Oh, well, the wine isn't up yet. I need to, we'll put that up this weekend. So,
Okay.
not to worry.
But you'll share that with us, right, Eileen?
Oh, yes. Yeah, I'm keeping a list of all the things I need to share.
Okay.
Oh, good. Okay.
The pairings, when the wine is up. So all good stuff.
Yeah. And I have to say too, Eileen, I just want to re-echo what Meg said at the beginning. We're also happy you're here. I think it's also pretty awesome that this is your ministry. You're a member of our diocese, and I'll just say, my sister and I were out in the Shenandoah Valley today, and came home with a whole bunch of wine and beer because we want to support our local businesses, and the service you're providing in the Arlington area is such a blessing to all of us. And
here.
Thank you. We
One more page.
Try.
Absolutely. And I love the slogan about we don't take ourselves too seriously.
Yeah, we can't. It's we're very fortunate that that we can continue to do business now, and we're just as you said, trying to get things to people in whatever way works for them, because some people are not able to get out, but yeah, you gotta laugh, and I think a lot of those saints laugh too. Gotta have a sense
of yeah.
Well, and I think that's a really great transition, because there's a saying, and I can't remember who said it, some great thinker, about that sometimes you can't control your situation, but you can always control your reaction to it. Yeah. And I think for some of us, it has been difficult not to think, our lives really have been uprooted. People aren't able to travel. People weren't able to get married. People weren't able to see their grandkids. People haven't been able to go to funerals. And people who've missed the birth of grandchildren. And it is a challenging time that way, but we do have, it is our option to decide how we're going to react to that. Yeah. So with that, we're going to talk about, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and on to our next saint.
Yeah. This saint is my go-to. I'll just be honest. Anytime that I am feeling particularly sorry for myself, or that someone has wronged me grievously or been mean to me, and I'll just be honest, I had one of those days this week. Aww. So, and I thought of Josephine Paquita, and it helped. Josephine Paquita had a pretty normal upbringing in the Sudan until she was about 7 or 8 years old, we think. She had a loving family, brothers and sisters, parents, and one day she was out playing and she was kidnapped.
Ooh.
Yeah. And she was placed in a hole for a month, and she was so scared that she was beaten every day. She was so scared that she never remembered her name. She didn't remember her birth date. She went through, I believe it was 4 different people who, quote unquote, owned her. To 4 people who continued to enslave her. Some of them horrifically. The picture you see here hides most of Josephine Paquita's body, not just because of modesty, but because there was one person who had designs cut into her skin everywhere but her face. Over 100 designs, and for good measure, rubbed them with salt so they would never go away completely. She couldn't move for weeks after that. Eventually, she ended up with a gentleman who was a businessman who happened to be, in Africa, but his home base was in Italy. And she remembered him as the first man who didn't beat her. He took her to his home in Italy, and she became the nurse / nanny for his little girl. And things went well. She, even during the worst of her times, she said later that she would look up at the stars and she would think, who put those stars there? And how does this all work? You know, she didn't have a whole lot of time to think about it because people were being so mean and evil to her, but she wondered about this. And the people who, this gentleman who had her serve as the nanny and nurse, happened to be Catholic, and she saw a crucifix. And at one point, she was with the little girl when the little girl had started school, and she saw a crucifix, and she noticed that the Christ on the cross had marks on his body just like hers, and she wanted to learn more about him. She thought that maybe she would like to know his story. This family decided they were going to permanently relocate from Italy to Africa, and there were enough trips that were going to need to be taken back and forth that the decision was made that Paquita, the slave traders, the people that had enslaved her, called her Paquita, which means fortunate one in Arabic. Yeah, pretty cruel, right? So they took her, because the parents were going to travel back and forth, the decision was made that Paquita and the little girl would live with some sisters in Italy. And the guy who managed the estate for this family also happened to be Catholic, and he gave her a crucifix of her very own. And he was the first one who told her about how Jesus got those marks on his skin. So she got to know the Canossian sisters during this time while the mother and father were away. And when they came back, Paquita said she was done. She was not going back to Africa, and in fact, she was done with them. She was not going to be part of their situation anymore. And there was a lawsuit in Italy, and the Catholic Church took on Paquita's cause. And it was determined that actually, since Italy had outlawed slavery some time earlier, that she had been, in fact, a free woman from the point that she set foot in Italy. She ended up becoming Catholic and a Canossian sister. She was known in the convent as the woman who would do anything. She liked being the porter, which meant she answered the door. She liked to help prepare things for Mass. She eventually became a speaker, although her Italian never really was very good. So another sister would speak for her, and she would talk, and the other woman would help her translate. But there was no task that was too small for Paquita, no task that was too large for Paquita. She did whatever she was asked to do because she believed she was that the people who asked her were inspired. At one point, she was asked what she would do if she encountered the people who had taken her away from her family, who had made her never remember her name. She never saw any of her brothers and sisters again. She never remembered her birthday. To the end of her life, there were times when she was sick that she would wake up screaming because she could still feel the chains around her ankles and her arms, her hand, her wrists. And she didn't even think about it. Her response was, if I met the people who enslaved me and even those that tortured me, I would get down on my knees and I would kiss their feet. Because if these things had not happened, I would not have been a Christian and a woman religious today. And I think about that, the times that I really try to remember that when I feel that I'm being persecuted at work, or someone has maybe said something unkind to me, intentionally or unintentionally. And I'm somebody who can take things really personally. And This quote in particular is one that I hold tight to my heart, and it helps because I think it wasn't even like something that she thought about and this was the correct answer and this is what she as a woman religious should say. The first time she was asked the question, that was her immediate response. That to me is the response of a holy woman. That to me is the response of a woman who I want to be like. So here you can learn in this particular.
Mel,
yeah.
Mel, we have a question
Sure.
from someone online who's watching. Do you know why they carve designs into her skin?
To be cruel.
Oh,
to be cruel. Yeah, it was kind of a form of branding that if she were ever to run away and someone found her, they would know that this particular person thought that she was his property.
Okay.
Which, you think about the cruelty on that. I mean, this young woman could not move for weeks afterwards, And yeah, that I think it says as much about him and sadism. Yeah. Isn't that awful? So I think she had a really special charism, and I'm sure, given that special charism, I'm sure you have very special accompaniment for us. There's actually even a quite good movie that was made about Paquita's life that I would recommend.
And are there any other resources, or will that go on the One More Page website?
That'll go on the One More Page website, but I would.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to speak lightheartedly after that, but just her capacity to forgive is just extraordinary. I mean, it really marks her out as someone unique. And for me, ever since I was a little kid, I've loved graham crackers. They're my comfort food. It's like if I'm feeling depressed, yeah, I should eat chocolate, but I really don't. I just want a graham cracker. So I was amazed to discover that this wonderful company, Asher's, which is in Pennsylvania, has mini graham crackers covered in dark chocolate. So if I were to meet St. Josephine Paquita, I would just say to her, have a chocolate-covered graham cracker. I mean, it's like, what else can you say to someone like that? It's just extraordinary. And I suppose, since she lived most of her life in northern Italy near the Veneto, I should have picked a wine from that region, but I didn't. I'm currently on a kick for Sicilian wines for two reasons. A, both of my mother's parents were born in Sicily, and B, I really like them. So,
alrighty then.
Oh, well, it's like completely subjective, no objectivity here. So there's this wonderful, all right, sooner or later I'll get it right. It's a Planeta Frappato Siciliana Vittoria, which is a region in northeastern Sicily. Actually, this wine comes from the northern slopes of Mount Etna. And I suppose it is theoretically possible, I'm just making this up, that when Paquita was sailing from Africa to northern Italy, they might have passed by the coast, and she might have, if it was a clear day, even seen Mount Etna off in the distance.
And
so
she did do speaking tours after she was a woman religious.
Well, there she was.
And Sicily is extremely Catholic, correct?
Oh, yes, it is. It's
very possible maybe she spoke there.
Well, let's hope so. And so I would like to raise a glass to St. Josephine Paquita and to Mel Rigney, who introduced me to her.
Thank you, Meg. I'll just say, having been very careful about the amount of the wine pairings I drank, they're wonderful. They're wonderful. I trust Meg implicitly on wine. I also trust her on chocolate, but I got to say, during the pandemic, I've ordered a heck of a lot of chocolate from One More Page, as Eileen can tell you, and I haven't had a bad one yet. So I guess just to close out the evening, I guess first, Meg, anything else you want to add, or?
No, I just want to thank all of the people who are watching us live. I've looked at some of the comments. I recognize some of the people. Thank you so much for the shout outs to me and Mel. And I love you all. God bless you all. Thank you for joining us on this super hot Arlington evening.
Thanks, Meg. So before I turn it over to Eileen, I just wanted to make just a very, very few closing remarks. I hope if you've taken anything from tonight, the thing I love about these women is, again, I'm kind of a tactile person, and we can see their faces. We know what they look like. We, in many cases, have videos of them. And perhaps more importantly, we can see the way their work continues to go on today. We're seeing all this not through a portrait's lens, not through the lens of somebody who's writing about them several hundred years later, but through their own words, through their images, through the videos of them from, I think it's, I'm going to lose track. So it's either Marianne Cope or I think it's Marianne Cope, a nephew who wrote an article for the Knights of Columbus magazine, and it's in the links. I mean, these are people, and I don't know about you, spoiler alert, but Brotherhood of Saints is dedicated to two of my uncles, who to me are uncanonized saints, because I've learned a lot over the years of my life. I've learned a lot about faith and compassion and love from them. And I think that's the takeaway here, that these are lives we can see firsthand. And one of the reasons we can see them firsthand is because we know people living them today. We know people who are not afraid to love. We know people who embrace. We know people who are capable of what seems to some of us to be breathtaking forgiveness. And likely we all do some of these things every day of our lives, but they're such part of our nature that we fail to recognize it. We're all called to holiness. We're all called to lead holy and virtuous lives in different ways. Saying yes can make us uncomfortable. Faith can make it easier, and so can the encouragement of our friends who are saints in the making. So I would just ask, if there's anybody you know who inspires one of these virtues in you, whether it's forgiveness or the bravery to be uncomfortable or to step into a situation that maybe you feel puts you at a little personal risk, I would just ask that you thank that person. You just let them know that what they're doing, whether they're conscious or unconscious of it, matters, and that it is seen and it is appreciated, and that you learn from it. And with that, turn it over to Eileen.
I was just going to say, and I think, we do take strength from all the people around us, and I take strength from hearing about these amazing saints from you, whose names I recognize, but did not know their stories. And I will definitely, folks, post the links to the different videos and things like that on our website and to Facebook also. And Meg's pairings of chocolate and wine with the saints, because I think that it sounds like kind of a lighthearted thing, but there was a lot of thought that she put into selecting these, and they do focus on different things about the saints. So thank you to both so much for sharing your Friday evening with us. Mel, as always, it is such a joy and inspiration to have you on, and we look forward to hosting you again, I hope, for Brotherhood.
Yes.
And is it still scheduled for October?
Yeah, and I think, Eileen, not to put you on the spot, but I think we offer a twofer at that point.
Okay.
Maybe we can do a special offer for, buy brotherhood, get sisterhood for a reduced price or something. And
I'm all for that.
yeah, and hopefully we'll all be in the store at that point. Maybe we can be in the store and virtual, but if we're virtual, I don't know. I hope Meg will come up with some pairings. It might be hard for her to come up with 366, but somehow.
I'm on it. Anything for
Challenge
you and the
accepted,
Saints
it
boys.
sounds like. Challenge accepted. Well, we also want to thank everybody who tuned in to join us tonight, and I too recognized many of these names. And thank you so much, Mel and Meg, and everyone. Have a wonderful weekend and be safe, please.
Yes. Take care. Be safe. Thank you, Eileen. Thank you, Mel. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.